Here to help me out, Tracy Walder is a former CIA and FBI agent. She worked as a staff operations officer at the CIA's Counter-Terrorism Center in the Weapons of Mass Destruction group. And Andrew Abood is a trial attorney who is based in the great state of Michigan. Okay, Tracy, I want to start with you, and I want to ask you about the 48 folders that were found empty. And they were folders that were clearly emblazoned with classified on the outside of them. Are there serial numbers? Is there a tracking system? Is this going to be something that's easy to track down where the documents might be that used to be in that folder? Like when we take books out of a library, there's a tracking system. Is it the same in the government?
The short answer to your question, Ashleigh, is actually no. You would think that there would be a tracking system. For the most part, we do know what goes in and goes out of our offices. But, with Trump, it's my understanding that a lot of times when he would be briefed, on classified things and classified events, he would ask, can I keep that? And a lot of times he was given that. And sometimes those things aren't logged. And I think if we want to take it even one step farther, yes, I'm very concerned about the fact that, these folders were empty. But I'm actually more concerned about is, some of these classified documents that were found, were there digital pictures taken of them? Were they texted to people? Were they emailed to people? So I think distribution of these is going to be, sort of much larger, really, than the document itself.
Well, there's distribution and then there's just eyes on, right? The way it's been explained to me, because I have never walked into a SCIF myself, which is a secure and controlled environment, right? It's like Get Smart's dome of silence, for lack of a better description. But the reason it's so secure is not just so that people can't listen through the walls or have their phones in there. They can't copy them. They can't make copies. And that's really important.
Yes.
Right. Which leads me to believe that there's probably not a lot of copies of these documents either, is what I'm thinking. So, Andrew, if they can't find what used to be in the empty folders, well, scenario number one, if they just can't find them, does that add to any potential charges that the president might actually face, given the fact that these things have just sort of, vanished?
I mean, it obviously draws an inference that he had the documents and they're no longer there. They could conclude that he's acting as a obstructing justice. And if they have witnesses to show that, in fact, he was in possession of those documents at one time and he's not producing them, then that could be a serious problem. But one of the things about criminal defense is that the absence of evidence does make a criminal case tougher to prove.
Well, yeah. I mean, although I've seen murder cases go ahead without a body, which I always found super remarkable, but it can be done, that's for sure. But that's a good point, Tracy. We were just talking about potential distribution or just even eyes on. What about just extraordinary recklessness? Because that's what James Comey said about Hillary Clinton. She had chains of emails that didn't have those markings. And they were deep down in those chains of the emails that were, on the private server. And he called her extraordinarily reckless. But grade the level of recklessness here as you see it, without, being political, if that's possible.
Sure. I mean, I've always felt that, what Hillary Clinton did with her email servers was extraordinarily reckless. And I still stand by that. But if I felt like that was extraordinarily reckless, I have to think that this is even more so reckless. And I'm really just approaching this from, a factual manner as someone who worked inside of a SCIF. If you take material out of a SCIF, you have to put it in a special pouch. And so really just him not doing that and have it sort of strewn in all of these boxes intermingled with unclassified material is reckless in and of itself and is mishandling of classified information, the same thing that Hillary Clinton did.
Yeah, and then when it comes right down to it, let's just take all those banners off those documents for a hot minute. Presidential records are the property of the government. There's no other way to state this. You can love them, you can want them, but they're not ours to take. They belong to the government, and that's the case that's likely to be made. Even if Donald Trump says, "I liked them and I wanted them," there's a process, and the national records has to be a part of it. So, Andrew, it's such a, this whole case is extraordinary, right? Even Bill Barr said, yes, it's extraordinary to take these things to your country club. It's extraordinary to raid the house of a president. But the indictment part is something that would be so unpalatable, even to people who hate Trump. They would probably hate the idea that we're doing the same thing that we accuse those people in those crazy countries of doing, locking up people for political reasons. So politically speaking, do you really see the law prevailing here when it comes to Donald Trump? I know that's a hard question. I know if we weren't talking about Donald Trump, this would be an easy one. But you heard Newt Gingrich and you heard Bill Barr. Do you think it's possible we're actually going to see an indictment here?
I mean, the one thing about it is they issued a search warrant. The warrant was reviewed and issued by a neutral and detached magistrate. And they went in, and it appears that what they were looking for, they actually found. And under those circumstances, it's not just political, because I think the record in history shows that the Department of Justice tried to work with the Trump lawyers to get the documents, and he wouldn't turn them over. So in that particular case, it's not just political, and it's clear at this point that unlike being a president, as a former president, he's essentially having documents in his possession that appears he should not have had and violates the law.
So, Tracy, what have you seen in your background about people who have had documents either foolishly or carelessly or recklessly, or maybe in a more sinister, with a more sinister motive? What have you seen through your career about how they were treated? And let's just go right to the far end of the spectrum, the really naughty ones who weren't just accidentally, walking out with a document stuck to their shoe like toilet paper.
That's an excellent analogy. So, I think it ranges on the spectrum. And what I have found so interesting in that it is rather apolitical. And I was thinking Trump was going to be indicted, and now I'm not so certain. But I look at like David Petraeus or Sandy Berger, who they walked out with classified documents, and I would argue that their motives were definitely nefarious. And both of them simply lost their security clearances and were fined. But then I look at others who, took documents for the same reasons and who were just sort of more entry or mid-level employees, and they received 3-year or 5-year prison sentences. So what I'm seeing is sort of the higher stature of folks, regardless of the motive, are basically walking off with, a slap on the wrist, so a fine, maybe losing their security clearance. And what I'm seeing is the mid to lower level job holders with these security clearances, they're the ones who are actually serving jail time, when really everyone should be serving jail time. So that's what I found kind of interesting, just in looking throughout the course of this.
Yeah, the little guy always gets the brunt end, right? It's just like, it's not just government, it's not just CIA and FBI, it's everywhere. Okay, so Andrew, when Bill Barr said today that he believed the obstruction was really where things were going to get ugly for the president, that lots of this might have been overlooked, as egregious as anybody watching might think, or not. It's the obstruction. It's the Martha Stewart part. It's not the crime, it's the cover-up. It's the obfuscation. It's the hiding. It's the concealment. Do you see this as Donald Trump's biggest problem, at least on the Mar-a-Lago front? I'm not talking about Washington or Georgia. I'm just talking about Mar-a-Lago.
Well, I mean, the obstruction is always the problem, and you can assert your innocence, but you also have an obligation to be honest and forthright with the federal government. That's a crime, and that's part of obstruction. And we see it issued all the time against many citizens. So in this particular case, I think it's really problematic for the president, former president, and it could be the least of his problems, given some of the other things that he has going on, with the fact that they actually found the documents in his possession, in his residence.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.